Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Hear Our Voices. This is your host, Kay Did, coming back at you one more time. So let's get some housekeeping in the way. So, guys, we are trying to grow our community on all these platforms that we have, right? Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, things like that, Facebook, right? But to do that, I can't be on my lonesome. I need you guys to jump in and be a part of our family. We definitely drop different episodes. We drop different tips and tricks that you could do for the shelter. We drop information that prevent you from getting from shelter. We drop information like cash transfer programs, which honestly, if I can get into it, I'll be happy to go any programs that are giving out free money, to be honest. So I hope the things that we give you can definitely help you and your family. Or if you're just a person who's just single, it doesn't matter. Some things that we do talk about here is for everybody. Some things are only for family, but we try to do our best to kind of include everybody in things too. But our main focus on this, podcast is families and shelter. They a lot of times are not seen by the people and by society. So we want to make sure we shed a light on those particular things and be able to get the families the help that they need in shelter and after shelter. A lot of times we don't think about after shelter because people just like you're home housed now, so you're fine. But a lot of times there's a lot of trauma come from shelter, a lot of trauma can come from homelessness in general. So we try to make sure we can help the families as best as we can. We might not be able to help everybody. Everybody's situation is definitely different, but we try our best to make sure we give out the resources that we can to help people. So if you want to follow us on any social media and anywhere you're hearing this podcast from, please press the like, press the follow button. That will help us out tremendously to get bigger and better. And we're trying to bring different things to you for this year, 2024. So this is February's right now hot topic. We're gonna be talking about the right to shelter. If you are listening to news, past couple of like honestly a year and a half, 2 years, the right to shelter has been a big thing in the news. And people who are not in my, fields, who like advocacy or work with shelters or work with families in New York City, might like, what's right to shelter? Or they think it's probably just like people just to be right to be a shelter, but is a really a thing behind it. It's a whole brainstorming, a whole thing would happen. And there's another thing was also called Callahan decree. People also mix these things two together, or so we're gonna have Will. He's our guest today, who's gonna teach us and tell us about the Callahan decree, sorry, and the right to shelter. I want to know more about it too. I only know I think a little bit about it, even though I do this work, but it's always good to know and learn about different things. So welcome guys to this month's hot topic. So Will, tell us what you do so we can know a little bit what you do and how can you inform us about this topic.
Well, good morning, and thank you for having me, Kate. I'm very honored to be here and be able to have this conversation with you. My name is Will Watts. I'm the Deputy Executive Director for Advocacy at Coalition for the Homeless. It's a mouthful,
I
but
know.
essentially it means that I have the pleasure of being able to work with the folks that are involved in everything from policy work to working in, we have a group of folks that are tasked with going into the shelters or our shelter monitors, as
Right.
well as our litigation work. So I have an opportunity to oversee a lot of that work and make sure that we're ultimately serving our clients, the community. And
Cool.
I've been here since June. Actually, I came from Los Angeles. So I should say that one of
Oh,
the things that I always have a unique opportunity to do is see how we do things differently here in New York relative to on the West Coast. And
right.
it has been eye-opening just to, I guess, on some level, greatly appreciate what's here relative to other parts of the country.
Right. I think people like to a lot of time downplay New York City, but we have a lot of resources. We might not use all of them correctly or that
Hmm.
well, but they
Hmm.
have a lot of opportunity for if you're in shelter for people with disabilities, or a lot of things. We need to get it together, but
Hmm.
compared to other states, we do have a lot of resources, and it's underused because people don't know how to get to it. And this is why we're here. We're here to share the word, get the resources out there so you know what to do for you and yourself. I can't just say family, just for we put a lot of things on here which is for anybody.
Hmm.
So if you know anybody who can use these resources, I implore you to make them know what it is. All right. So yes.
Absolutely.
So we're gonna get into it. Can you explain what the right to shelter actually is and what does it mean for people who are homeless?
Yeah, it's a very valuable right. And it's something that I know that other parts of the country lack, and as a result, have a completely different outcome. In a nutshell, the right to shelter basically means that everyone in the city, regardless of their immigration status, has a right to shelter if they have no other safe place to go. That's it in a nutshell. I know that it has its own sort of complexities in how it's
Right.
implemented and what have you, but in a nutshell, it just basically means that you have this right to be sheltered and not to have to live on the streets or have to deal with unsafe housing conditions.
Makes sense, makes sense.
Yeah.
Granted, guys, when you are going to Example Path or other places like that, it's hard to get a shelter. Even with this right to shelter, they really
Hmm.
want you to prove that you don't have a place to stay. So don't
Hmm.
think it's like, oh my gosh, just block here and come. No, they really want you to give them a reason. And they have
Hmm.
each sector has a different, like families and singles have a different requirement to actually get into shelters. Like families need 2 years. I want to say singles need a year. They're trying to change these rules for families to look more like singles, but it takes time. And I don't like how they split up the families and whatever together. That's how they do it. That's how the vouchers also work depending on who's in your family and things like that. But because finding 2 years of where you lived for some people are harder. It's harder than others, and because of that, they don't get to be eligible
Yeah.
for shelter. So how
Yeah.
did this right to shelter actually come about? How did this
Yeah.
like happen?
Exactly. And I'm glad you mentioned some of the things you did because basically the right to shelter originated from a lawsuit that was filed in 1979. So at
Okay.
the top of the show, you mentioned Callahan, and that's the name of the lead plaintiff in the lawsuit. The
Okay.
lawsuit was called Callahan v. Carey. It was, like I said, brought in 1979 by, it was like filed as a class action, meaning a class of unhoused, at that time, men who are here in New York City. And they were demanding that the city and state provide shelter. And that lawsuit was based on the state constitution. So
Okay.
the New York State Constitution has this provision, be very technical here, Article 17 of the Constitution. And the language says the aid, care, and support of the needy are public concerns and shall be. And that language is really important because it's not maybe, could be, if you want it to be, it
Right.
shall be provided by the state and by such
Mm,
of its subdivisions. So the argument was that the state constitution required the city and state to provide shelter for anyone who needed it. And in that initial case, that's what was determined. I mean, there was a decision in December of 1979 where the court ordered the city and state to provide about 750 shelter beds at that time that were needed. It didn't resolve all of the issues, and as a result, the lawsuit didn't end right there. Because back in the 70s, the shelters that were in existence or the
okay.
hotels that folks were going to with vouchers, the conditions were horrible. And
I can
so,
imagine.
yeah, it's really bad. And so folks sometimes opted not to go into the shelter because it was just not safe or they didn't want to deal with these unsanitary conditions.
Right.
So the lawsuit had asked not only for the shelter to be provided, but also wanted to address conditions. And in December, when that one ruling came out that I mentioned, the court did not address the conditions issue. So the lawsuit continued for a while longer
Mm,
and ultimately ended in an agreement. And that agreement was adopted by the court as a court order. So when you hear people talk about the consent decree or what have you, that's what they're talking about, this agreement that was entered into by the various parties to the lawsuit. And so that began the right to shelter here in New York.
okay.
And it's interesting. I mean, it was an initial way to kind of protect individuals, but also, as I mentioned, it was just regarding unsheltered men at the time.
Right.
And so over the years, it got expanded. More lawsuits were brought to
As it
expand that
should
right.
be.
As it
Yes.
should be, absolutely. And so the first case just kind of got us started, and it gets cited as the case because it is the beginning of the whole right to shelter. But basically, when we talk about the right to shelter, we're talking about not only Callahan, but a number of the other cases that followed that expanded that right to other parts of the community. And when you were mentioning sort of the differences in sort of the eligibility process, some
Right.
of that arises out of the way in which these other lawsuits got resolved. Yeah, so I'm happy to talk about some of those differences, but they basically reflect the different negotiations or the different outcomes of those cases that were brought to the courts.
Got it. So if you don't like, I feel like he can say certain parts, like example, things were initially they were for men, and then women was like, no, we need some rights too. So it got for women, and they kind of squeezed in the families in the middle. That's basically how it was. I feel like
Yep.
the person who negotiated for families to do a little bit better of a job, but at least we got in there. That's really
Yes, absolutely. Exactly. Yeah, because the things that you were talking about in terms of the eligibility requirements, those really are not there for single adults. So
right.
show up in shelter, you basically, you go through an intake process, but there isn't this eligibility determination that
Yeah.
is there for families. And the family case, which was Boston, Boston v. City of New York, and which was resolved in 2008, resulted in this eligibility determination, looking at like where you've lived over the last 2 years and a number of other factors to see if you're eligible for shelter.
I'm just saying, out of all people you pick on is the families. We have enough going on. Kids going to school, kids getting sick. You're getting sick because one of the kids is sick. We got so much things to think about other than eligible. I'm just saying, people can go a year. I know people who've gone through the eligibility process for a year. That's a lot for your kids, especially if they're in school. They have to go from this shelter, from this borough. There's a lot. I'm gonna tell you guys one thing. If you're in the shelter right now and you need somebody to, if you live in Brooklyn and your child's in school in Manhattan, I can help you get somebody to transfer your kid to a shelter, well, you and your family to a shelter in Manhattan, because they're supposed to put you in a district. And if they're not putting you in a district that you are living in, they're supposed to also give you transportation, which honestly, transportation for New York is garbage. So it's better just to try to switch the shelters over into that borough to make it easier. Because kids shouldn't have to get up 3-4 hours earlier just to get to school, get the education. They have enough going on. I'm just putting that as a small little note in there. So as we know in the news, they want to overturn this thing. Can you tell us more about that and what they're going to be doing? Do you think it should happen? Do you think it's going to happen? Like what about that?
Yeah. Yeah, and in so many ways, I think what's going on is sort of it's just a convergence of a lot of different events,
Right.
because this arose. So the lawsuit, like Callahan v. Carey, has been there from 1979, like you mentioned, and the consent decree has been there since '81. And number of governors, number of mayors have attempted to erode the right to shelter. So the fact
Wow.
that this particular administration wanted to go into court and try to change the right to shelter was not new. I mean, it's just that the basis in which they wanted to do that was a little different.
That's
And
interesting.
yeah,
Because
so
they
they're
don't talk about that. They make it just seem like it's only he's the like from what I'm hearing. I don't know everything. I'm not, I'm not perfect, so I don't hear everything single thing. But they make it seem like he's the only person who wants to take these rights away from people. And it's like what you're telling me, he's not the first.
He's not the
He might
first.
not be the
No.
last.
And he probably won't be the last. Exactly. Yes.
Wow.
He probably will not be. But what he's done is he's more or less used the new arrivals that have been
Right.
coming into the city since 2022, or maybe a little bit before then. He's been using that as the justification for needing to change the right to shelter. And the main claim is that they need more flexibility. They need to be able to address the way in which they operate shelters in a
Right.
way that allows them to more easily manage the influx of hundreds of thousands of individuals coming into the city. And the city began this process back in May of last year. They filed paperwork with the court that began the process. And throughout the last couple of months or so, they've been sort of amending what they've been asking the court for. Their most recent request, which was back in, I guess, October, they had basically sought to change the way that it worked for single adults, such that if you were on public assistance, you'd be eligible for shelter. But if you were not on public assistance or eligible for public assistance, you could not get into shelter. And that would basically extend to a whole lot of people beyond those who are newly arriving to the city, which was just appalling.
That's
And
annoying.
uh-huh,
It's
yeah,
annoying because
uh-huh,
if you ever know about welfare, guys, it's when you're poor, is amazing. When you're
mhm,
trying to make it up there, if you make one penny over, they're kicking you off. So the person who's just trying to make it because they're going paycheck to paycheck to paycheck is just trying to scrape by, but they can't get PA. And now
mhm,
you're telling me, oh, I can't get shelter. I don't have
mhm,
PA. That's
mhm,
ridiculous. They're already
mhm,
living paycheck to paycheck. That's why they idiot in the first place. No one,
mhm,
I'm telling you right now, nobody honestly wants to be in shelter. Like, come, let's be for real. This is not a luxury. This is not a luxury.
mm-mm,
For
mm-mm.
them to do that is ridiculous.
Yeah.
But sorry,
Yeah.
it's just
And no, your reaction is exactly the reaction we all had because it was, I mean, to the extent that the concern was how to address the new arrivals, this went way beyond trying to
mm-hmm.
address the situation. And the argument was that, other parts of the state, that's how they approach their eligibility for shelter. So that's the way it should be here to be consistent. I mean, that was the argument that was being made,
That doesn't
which
make
I mean,
sense.
it doesn't make it more palatable. It doesn't make it more right. It just was the argument they were making.
I,
And so it,
it's crazy to me. That's
yeah, yeah, exactly. It's insane. So that is just such a significant change to the right to shelter, a significant attack at a time when we keep hearing about how hard it is for folks to find housing because homelessness is a housing issue. I mean, and if we
mm-hmm.
are struggling with finding vacant places and having the resources in order to house folks in a more stable manner, then why are we going to, implement something that's going to undermine the only
Exactly.
rights that folks have that get them off the streets and into some place that, like you said, it may not be ideal, but it's not on the streets and it's not like what folks are dealing with in Los Angeles, where you have like 55,000 plus people who are unsheltered just in LA County. Um,
Right.
yeah, so that was the argument that they've been making. The court basically the process, not to get too technical, but basically the court said, let's mediate, let's have some conversations before we go into full-fledged litigation where we're, having, things being filed and, court hearings all the time. Let's mediate. So the judge has been conducting mediation between us as the plaintiffs and the city and the state to try to see if we can reach a resolution. And those conversations have been productive in many ways in the sense that it's given us an opportunity to kind of identify some ways to kind of address what ultimately are the concerns of the city. So we've
Right.
been proposing things like, having case management and other resources available to help identify what the needs are of new arrivals to help
Right.
them figure out how best to transition, having conversations around, the need to think about this state relocation program called MRAP, how to
Mm-hmm.
make sure that that's being
Heard about it.
utilized in a way that is, going to ensure that more people are aware of the program or become eligible for it and actually get relocated throughout the state in the way that it's intended. So those conversations have allowed us to, be able to hopefully make some progress, but we're still in mediation. We haven't resolved it, and we'll see, how it unfolds. But at least it kind of put a pause, at least on where the city wanted to go, if they
Right.
had their way in terms of being able to implement something that was going to really make it difficult for a whole lot of people beyond just the new arrivals to access shelter.
You know what's ridiculous for me? Because
Hmm.
we already know that New York City is almost a basically itself thing by itself. We know
Hmm.
we live in New York State, but the
Hmm.
rules a lot of times do not apply to New York City. So for you to all of a sudden make a rule because the other part of the state is doing one thing, if that was the case, we should do everything like that.
Mhm.
All of our systems are not the same. When people come from for homelessness, they do not go to the upstate New York. They're
No.
coming to New York City.
Mhm,
This is
mhm,
where if, I think I'll go back from Ellis Island. We have
mhm.
been the port for people
Uh-huh.
coming in for long as we know. So
That's
why
right.
all of a sudden we're trying to change it, make it seem like, oh my gosh, it's a new phenomenon under the sun
Exactly.
when it really isn't.
It
That's what
isn't.
blows my mind.
It isn't. And it's all about, I know that this is federal policy is unfortunately the
Right,
thing that keeps us kind of contained in what we can and cannot do, but we
right,
have to think innovatively, and the state has a role here. And to the extent that there are jobs and places that need folks upstate, then the state should be thinking about how to facilitate that.
right,
And should not be a situation where it's sort of like a win-lose. I mean, we definitely have needs across the state that can be addressed, and we
right,
have people that are here that maybe for no choice of their own, but they came here looking for a better life. And if
right.
it's about finding a place where they can have that stability and a job and a safe community for their families, then why not facilitate them being able to access those places? So in some ways, it's sort of like I'm not really sure why it is the way it is, because it seems like we have a lot of great opportunities. So, like you said, people have been coming to through Ellis Island historically. I mean, people have been coming to New York City for years and years and years, and this is part
Right.
of who we are, to welcome people from all over the place and to benefit from that enrichment that comes from cultures and others coming to the city and to the state. So nothing new. It's just how we're managing it that is really different.
That's definitely true. The wave of people from what I, not all of them, but some of them, I know they have left their homes and like they have just took what they have on their back.
Hmm.
Women have just taken their kids, their fathers have been taking their kids, and they have
Hmm.
nothing. Some of them have left good jobs because
Hmm.
they want to have a better life because of what's happening in their country, which a lot of
Hmm.
times people in America do not understand. I'm not saying everybody in America, I'm just saying a lot of people in America, they are living the cozy life. They're not having the same thing other countries are having. And we have luxuries. You know, we don't think it's luxuries. We have clean, a lot of us have clean water. That's a
Hmm.
luxury, not
Hmm.
including Flint. I know y'all going through struggles over there. Like that's not
Yeah, that's a
happening.
whole nother episode.
Right, it's a whole other thing. But I mean, like New York, like places we have clean water, we have clothes, we have other countries have to fight to get these things, and that's why they come over here. People are out to take their lives away. That's why they come over here to get safety. A lot of them are leaving good jobs. Doctors,
Yeah.
lawyers, like people are leaving their cushy job to come to a country where the qualifications are not going to count anymore unless they go back to school and get a GED because they don't have no school records.
Hmm.
Let's think
Yeah.
about it. And
Hmm.
usually the people who are coming here are the hardest workers.
Yeah,
And they'll come here and still do little jobs here and there just to make sure their families are supported.
hmm.
I'm saying New York City is honestly, we're packed. We probably don't need any more people. But upstate New York, I lived upstate for a year and a half when I went to school. So they need more population up there. They have more space. They're more open. Well, I always think we could just build honestly a new community. People from New York who already live here from before could just honestly move up there. We're
Hmm.
so New York. I personally don't want to leave, but the people who would like to leave and live more of like a country life,
Hmm.
that would be a great place to go because
Hmm.
there's so much space, so much land upstate. They should probably shouldn't be giving only. I know they do transfers and stuff and paths. People want to go up, a certain place. But if New York City really want to develop another place upstate, and anybody
Hmm.
who wants to go, like they have that program for the newcomers. Maybe
Yeah.
they should do that for more, not only people who are newcomers, just anybody in general, and not have so much stipulations on it, but just build housing and people just go. Maybe have
Hmm.
a train that goes by, could be close to like how New Jersey has the PATH train, something like that
Uh-huh.
could be a thing. 'Cause people think that, granted, a lot of places in New York, upstate New York is far away. I went to school at like 5 to 8 hours. I think it's different how you drive. If you really pedal to the metal, you can get there in like 5.5, 6 hours. If you take the time on the train, it's like 8 hours. Well, I went to Plattsburgh State, and
Uh-huh.
if we do something like that, and put it near a Amtrak station, something like that, we could build a lot of communities upstate. We could build
Hmm.
a really nice community, and I'm just saying, these are things we could think about. Like we always think
Hmm.
about just, is the wrong thing is happening? Think about solutions. The
That's
more
right.
people we have, the more workers we get done, more factories we can have here. I know we don't like factories and all, but the point is we need to make our own stuff, make our own food, make our own, like we need to take care of ourselves instead of going to other countries to have them do that for us. If we did
Hmm.
that all ourselves in America, I know it's more expensive. That's the only problem why we outsource. But they're hard workers. Like, I'm just saying, I
Yeah.
came from an immigrant mom. My mother and father's born in Jamaica. They're
Uh-huh.
hard workers. Right
Hmm.
now, I have like about 7 to 8 jobs. I'm a hard worker. I'm just saying. I don't want to do manual labor now. I'm not gonna lie. I'm like talking and doing this, but we're hard workers,
Yeah.
and we don't come to take from you. I promise.
No.
You just want to make
No.
sure us and our families are fine, and that's all
Yeah.
it is.
Hmm.
So I think we have to keep those things in mind when people talk about the newcomers,
Yeah.
and not think so negative about it. Think the positive. What can
Hmm.
they do for us? Not that I say we try to use them or nothing, but how can
No.
they help build the economy? How can they help build our population? Um,
Hmm.
this could be a kid's husbands and wives in the future. I'm just saying, you just
Hmm.
never know what you could get. You could probably learn a little Spanish. Granted, they're not the only country who speak. People come in who speak French. You'd be
Hmm.
surprised. So I'm
Yeah.
just saying.
Exactly. Yes, it definitely enriches us all. And like you said, if people have endured what they've endured to get to New York, I mean, you hear these stories of folks that like that just walked miles and miles and endured going through the Darien Gap and all these places that
Right.
are definitely, not easy places to travel through. And that shows a lot of determination. And
Yes.
they are definitely committed to wanting to make a life here, and they just need some of these barriers to and be removed from them. And unfortunately, the way their immigration system works right now, that they cannot legally work until they've gone through a certain process. And so it's just unfortunate that that's the way it's set up, and that we don't have the ability, at least locally, to do anything about that.
So what does people should do if they want to, you know, help with this? And also, do they have advocates in the room, like people who have actually lived experience, or the only people like in the big chairs, the big execs in these meetings? How do they do that?
Are you talking about advocacy for the new arrivals, or just generally for
I
the
mean,
house
because you said
community?
there's negotiations with the judge and stuff like that. It's not really like a court proceeding. It's more of like, sitting down on the table. Who's at the table when this is
Yeah.
happening?
Well, for the court proceeding, because it's only limited to those that are actual litigants in the case, and it's just those individuals.
Got it.
But in terms of the information that's informing those discussions, I mean, we're definitely engaged with a lot of community groups that are working solely on behalf of unhoused individuals and that are new arrivals. So, like Africana and a number of other groups that have been working tirelessly to help address the needs of new arrivals. And so those information we're getting from those contexts definitely help inform some of those conversations. But our space is not, the litigation is not the only space where there are conversations around how to address the new arrival situation. There have been definitely meetings with the various departments and what have you, and some of those are folding in advocates, as well as opportunities for, like, I was at a hearing at City Council a couple months ago around the 60-day rule, and there were folks that were with lived experience who were there talking about how this was impacting them and their families. So definitely trying to get the voice of those who are experiencing these issues, as well as advocates that are on the ground seeing how it's playing out, because it's important that the policy reflect what the reality is.
Right. Definitely. Do you have any last words to tell people about how to be involved or just anything about what's this is about?
Yeah. Well, right to shelter, as much as I mean, it's in the news, it's really important that folks understand what it's about. So I'm glad you're doing this episode. I'm also encouraging folks to just really get involved however they can. I know from time to time, there are various rallies, there are various opportunities to speak to elected officials, but just stay plugged in. You can follow us on our website, that's coalitionforthehomeless.org, or another website is NYSANE, so New York Sane.org. And that's another opportunity to just stay engaged with the conversation around right to shelter and some of the various opportunities. There are a couple of legislative items that are before both the state and the city council. At the state level, there is a bill that's looking at 30 and 60-day limits on shelter. Again, this is targeted more towards the new arrival situation and things that you may have been seeing in the press around limitations on their shelter stays.
Right.
that bill is attempting to make it such that such limits cannot exist. So folks can get involved in advocating at the state level, but there's also a similar bill that's going to be here in the city. Hanif is going to be putting that forward, and I think there's going to be a rally and what have you coming up around that sometime soon. So there's definitely a lot of opportunity for folks to get involved, but checking out the websites will give you an opportunity to kind of see when those are happening, as well as if there are particular ways in which you want to get involved to express that interest.
Got it. Thank you so much. Thank you, Will, for coming on and teaching us, because you can't do anything if you don't know the information. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So thank you guys for listening. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for being amazing. Definitely follow us on our all social media. Please follow and subscribe. We're trying to grow a community, guys, and we have so much more things in store for you. We're trying to be bigger and better over here on Hear Our Voices. Thank you for being amazing. Bye.